Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Benjamin Harrison, and the focus is national leader. The year is 1888, it's an election year. Harrison is out of office. He had lost his re-election for senator just recently, and the national campaign was expected to be a rematch between the incumbent Grover Cleveland and James Blaine, who had been the Republican nominee in the last cycle. But early in 1888, Blaine took himself out of the race. He was off in Europe, he was vacationing, he sent a letter back saying, I'm not going to go for the presidency this term. People weren't sure if he really meant it, so he actually heard that. He sent a second letter. He was out of this one, so a wide open campaign for the Republican nomination to go up against Grover Cleveland. Now, for Benjamin Harrison, he was the opposite of Cleveland on almost every key political topic. They were not on the same page when it came to the currency, when it came to veterans issues, and most importantly for Harrison was the tariff. Harrison believed in protection, a high tariff. Now, this was a topic that had actually been controversial in the United States for decades. And it really crossed party purposes. It was more of a sectional issue. It's sort of where you sat in the economic food chain. If you were a producer of raw materials, farmers, a lot of the folks in the South and now in the West, they wanted low tariffs because they wanted to be able to sell their products overseas. And if there's a high tariff in the United States, other countries would put a tariff on their goods. It would be hard to export into those countries. But if you were a manufacturing center, particularly in the North and the East, and you were in the finished goods business, you wanted protection. You wanted a high tariff to keep goods out from other countries and capture the domestic market for your own finished goods. Harrison was firmly in the camp of protection because he believed that was the best interest of the United States. It was sort of a nationalistic policy. This wasn't just about getting enough revenue to fund the government, but actually to help U.S. industry be competitive against these international markets. And he thought it was good for wages, it was good for jobs. He was for protection. Grover Cleveland, the incumbent in the White House, very much against the high tariff. Now, one of the key players in the race for the Republican nomination was going to be Stephen Elkins. Elkins was actually a longtime supporter of James Blaine, but with Blaine out of the mix, he's now kind of a free agent. He was friends with Harrison. He started advising Harrison. He basically said, look, probably nobody's going to get the nomination in the first ballot. Your key, be everyone's second choice. So Elkins is helping behind the scenes, strategizing with Harrison. He's got his money men also looking at this, Lewis Michener and Wharton Barker, but Harrison had technically not really entered the race yet. It's February of 1888, and he finally sort of got his coming out party. He gave a speech at the Michigan Club in Detroit. Now, this was the scene of one of his grandfather, William Henry Harrison's great triumphs in the War of 1812, so a very friendly crowd. And Harrison, who had just lost his Senate seat, came out with the following statement: I am a dead statesman, but I am a living and rejuvenated Republican. And that last part of the line, a living and rejuvenated Republican, kind of caught on. The very next month at the Marquette Club, this is in Chicago, Harrison has really much made it clear. It is time for the Republicans to get that power back from the Democrats. He told this group that we took the ship of state when there was treachery at the helm, when there was mutiny on the deck, when the ship was among the rocks, and we put loyalty at the helm. We brought the deck into order and subjection. This was what the Republican Party was all about. The Democrats were really aligned to the Confederacy in his mind still, and in the minds of many. Time to put the Republicans back in power, and it was pretty clear that he was now in the race. There were many others in the race, including a fellow Hoosier. From Indiana, Judge Walter Gresham was being considered. In New York, Chauncey Depew was a popular candidate. Governor Russell Alger of Michigan, Senator William Allison from Iowa, all of these were in the mix. And again, Elkins was key, really trying to bring those James Blaine supporters into the Harrison camp. And for Harrison's bid, anytime he gave a speech, high praise for James Blaine, doing his own to court those folks. Now, Harrison would not be at the convention. That wasn't done at the time. It was Michener, Lewis Michener, who was actually the lead representative for Harrison when they gathered in convention in Chicago, and he basically had two instructions. Be everyone's number two, as we talked about before, and no deals. No backroom deals that would handcuff Harrison if he actually became the president, and he would then be having to give in to somebody as the path to getting there. Well, placing his name into nomination was actually Harrison's former law partner, who happens to be now the governor of Indiana by the name of Albert Porter, but it was John Sherman of Ohio who came out on top at the beginning in that first ballot. Sherman had been perennial candidate for the president. He had 229 votes at the time, more than double anybody else, but still about 200 shy of the majority, and it was unclear if he had enough push to actually get to the majority. The key in the nomination process actually occurred on the fourth ballot when Depew, the guy from New York, dropped out. Now, Depew had never met Harrison before, but he liked him. He liked his policies. He liked him from what he had heard about him. And sort of, again, out of the blue, Depew, who drops out, he pushes New York to go for Harrison. And that endorsement really made a big deal because this basically turned into a two-person race, John Sherman and Benjamin Harrison. No winner that day. They broke for the night. Michener working the hotel lobbies behind the scenes. The next day, Wisconsin out front, switching over to Harrison, then California pretty soon. Harrison had the lead on the seventh ballot, and on the eighth, he went over the top. The Republican nominee for president of the United States. New York's Levi Morton got the vice presidential nod, so the two most important states were represented, these swing states. Indiana at the top of the ticket, New York on the number 2 spot. For Harrison, the '88 campaign was spent almost entirely at home. This was a front porch campaign in Indianapolis, but he was plenty busy. About 300,000 people came to Indianapolis during the course of the campaign to hear Harrison speak. He gave about 80 speeches. Now, he changed the topics a little bit based on who was in the audience, except really the one topic that was always there, again, was the tariff. Protection, that was the center of his campaign, and again, a stark contrast to the incumbent president, Grover Cleveland, who wanted to bring tariff rates down. Harrison wanted to make them even higher, a very clear distinction. The thing about protection, though, that helped Harrison was it had a lot of money behind it. And so Harrison's campaign, which was well organized by the Republican Party, also was incredibly well funded. You had the Protective Tariff League, the American Iron and Steel Association in their camp, pouring money into this campaign. You also had Lew Wallace. Who was Lew Wallace? Well, he was a former Union general, but he became much more famous as the author of Ben-Hur, the best-selling novel, who actually was asked then to write the official biography, campaign biography for Harrison. So that was this book, and it was one of the many different pieces of material out there trying to get Harrison's name to the top of the list. But probably the biggest thing of all was James Blaine. Still very popular in the Republican Party. He comes back from Europe. It's summertime now. Harrison already has the nomination, and he took the stump aggressively in favor of Benjamin Harrison. He spoke in many states, including 2 major rallies that took place in Indianapolis, where he not only praised Harrison, he excoriated Cleveland, made him the tariff was also center of that kind of stuff as well. But what about Cleveland? He's the incumbent president. He decided effectively not to campaign. He took himself out of the campaign. He took his cabinet out of the campaign. They had work to do. This was not what a president should be doing. If he wants to be reelected, fine, but he wasn't going to work for it. In the public, he thought that was sort of unbecoming. But the key decision that Cleveland made actually had to do with the vote in New York, and that's what this election came down to. David Hill had actually taken over for Cleveland as governor of New York when Cleveland became the president. Cleveland was a reformer. He had pushed reform in New York, he was pushing reform in Washington, but David Hill was more a product of the machine class of politics and fell back into the traps of patronage and not towards civil service reform. And Cleveland was not going to support Hill for his renomination or his reelection for governor of New York, even though they're from the same party, because Cleveland just didn't like Hill's politics. Well, this mattered because Hill won re-election in 1888 in New York by about 20,000 votes. Cleveland lost New York by about 15,000 votes to Harrison. That difference, Hill's supporters who didn't go for Cleveland basically made the difference in the election. Because Harrison went over the top, he won his home state of Indiana, which was key, but it was really New York that ultimately made the difference. The final vote in the Electoral College, Harrison 233, Cleveland 168. Cleveland won the popular vote by about 100,000 votes. Doesn't matter. It's the Electoral College that matters. And pretty soon, the president-elect and this future 23rd president of the United States all of a sudden was Benjamin Harrison. Harrison immediately focused on his cabinet, and he decided to start with James Blaine, who had certainly been helpful to him during the campaign. Blaine really wanted it. He had been the Secretary of State under James Garfield, but of course Garfield had been assassinated. He left after that, so he didn't really get a chance to do very much there. There was concern that a Blaine in the cabinet might try to take over the president. There was kind of feelings that he had done that to Garfield, but Harrison wasn't worried. And in fact, he told his private secretary, Elijah Halford, that, Brother Halford, you and I will not have so good a time in Washington with Mr. Blaine out of the cabinet as with him in it. Let's bring him in. And he was actually happy to have him as his Secretary of State. He also wanted Michener to be in the cabinet, but Michener decided to stay in Indiana. He had been elected as the Attorney General of the state. He was going to stay there. The other money man was Wharton Barker. Barker really wanted to be Secretary of the Treasury. He felt he had deserved it with all the work he had done. But in this case, Harrison went in a different direction. He turned down Barker's pleas, and instead he went with Congressman William Windom to be the Secretary of the Treasury. Blaine was really the standout, the major name in the cabinet, not so much the rest of the folks, but it was a very competent group. You had 6 lawyers, a couple of businessmen, 4 former Union generals, no political bosses, which was key, and all were church-going Presbyterians, which was also key for the president-elect. Well, Harrison left Indianapolis with his family on February 25th, 1889. This was an emotional day for him. He was spotted in his personal library at home, kind of with tears in his eyes, a little trepidation, as the emotion of this day was kind of really coming home to roost. He was on the back of the train, ready to set off for Washington, D.C., and he told the people who came out to greet him, there is a great sense of loneliness in the discharge of high public duties. The moment of decision is one of isolation. He knew that this was going to be a difficult job, but he was ready for it. Off they went. Next stop, Washington, D.C., and the presidency of the United States, and that is the story for another day. That's Benjamin Harrison, a national leader from the life of Benjamin Harrison. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.